So in this first video I want to talk through some of the key tools that you might need or set up if you want to create your own bases or dioramas. So here are some of the basic bases that I will be talking about in future videos, so do look out for those. So you can do a regular square one, it's probably the easiest one, and this will be the first video that I'll show you, and then you can move up to something that's a little bit more advanced. It might look a lot more advanced, but actually is not as difficult as you might first think. So this video, as I said, it's about talking through some of the key tools that you might need before you can even start the process of creating your own base for your transformer toys. So the first thing you need is the material itself, and the material that I use is called styrofoam. So here's a small block this is a bit of an offcut from another piece I was working on, and this piece here you can see much larger. It actually comes in usually kind of 600 millimeters by 500 millimeter sheets, and this is a 100 millimeter thickness. So for the bases that I showed you earlier, for these ones here, you would only need really a 50 millimeter thickness, but you would get a sheet that's actually as large as what you see here on screen as this work surface here. So you get a large sheet, and that would cost you about £10. I use a place called Till Gear. There's probably lots of other sites you could go to for styrofoam, but that's the site that I use. That's Till Gear if you're interested. And yeah, £10 would buy you a large sheet, and you would get lots of bases out of that sheet. So that's the material that we use. Now to cut into that material, it's quite soft. You can press into that quite easily, and it will leave a mark, as you can see there. You will need some cutting tools. So I use this knife here. This is actually a floristry knife, but you could use any kind of, a regular kitchen knife would do. You just need obviously a tapered edge. I quite like this one because it's got a long blade to it. You can use a scalpel. I have used a scalpel with some of my previous bases, but I quite like the long edge that you get on this knife here. So it's really just finding the knife that's suitable for you, or that you feel comfortable working with. One thing I would suggest that you buy almost immediately after you found a knife that you think works is a sharpening tool, because you will have to kind of sharpen these knives regularly, as they do blunt quite easily after you've been working with styrofoam. So yeah, a sharpener of some description is very useful once you've also got a knife that you want to use. You'll also need some files. So again, just a small set of smaller files. Again, you can pick these up from a DIY store, usually for about £4. I did decide to purchase a larger file as well, just for some of the larger pieces. I haven't actually used this all that often, but I just thought it was worthwhile to have that in, and I've used it on occasion, so I am making use of it. But that was actually about the cost of the whole set of these small files. That was another £4 from Wilkinson's, which is a brand in the UK. A measuring tape or ruler is also very useful, because you will need to measure out your bases before you start cutting, so that's quite a useful tool to have. Some assorted sandpapers of different grades. Again, you can pick this up from any kind of DIY shop, and they're quite cheap, so again probably £2 or £3 for those. You'll also need some paints when you come to the painting part, and add in the detail. So I've got Dale Rowney acrylics there. Definitely use acrylic paints. I haven't tried out things like enamel paints on styrofoam, so I'm not sure how the styrofoam would react to enamels, but acrylics work really well, and the nice thing about them is that you can thin it down or use it quite thick depending on what effect you're trying to achieve. That set there would probably set you back about £12, but you can pick up acrylics reasonably cheap now in lots of places. Even places like the pound store would have acrylics, and they're absolutely fine for these bases, so you don't have to pay for the expensive brands. You can go cheap when it comes to paints. Couple of older brushes, because you'll be using the dry brush technique quite often. Different sizes as well is quite useful. I tend to go for the flat brushes, which is the type that you see here. You can also get round brushes which tend to have a point. Round brushes are great for details, however I haven't had to use any of those yet. I tend to find that these brushes work well for creating the paint effects that I've been using on the bases that I've made so far. So yeah, so some brushes, different sizes, would be useful. And again, don't pay expensive for brushes, because you're going to ruin them really as you start to use some of the techniques that you'll need to use when creating these bases. One of the things that I've purchased recently is this electric foam cutting kit. This cost about, I think it's about £25 off Amazon. So this one says go change, and it's a plug-in kit, so you do have to have a power source for it. But what it gives you is a handle and then a couple of these add-ons. Now these tools here, these are more for engraving. I have used them a couple of times when I'm cutting styrofoam, but they're particularly good for kind of drawing into the styrofoam. So on here I did use these tools to kind of cut these shapes. However, you need to be very careful with them, so they're easy to kind of mishandle and slip with. So I'm a bit unsure what I feel about them at the moment, so it's really a bit of trial and error on those. But really the reason why I purchased this particular cutter is for this tool here. So what you do is you just plug this in, and then this wire here heats up, so obviously you don't want to be touching that wire, but then it would allow you to kind of cut some very kind of, I suppose, more organic or interesting shape. So you can see this kind of shape here I cut out just by literally dragging this hot wire over the styrofoam. So it's really good for creating more unique shapes, or to get your initial cut before then you work back into it with a normal knife and get some of those kind of more detailed areas. So I found that really useful. But actually for my first bases, just to kind of get going, so these kind of square bases here, I just used this knife. That was it. A bit of sandpaper and of course the paints. So to have a go, really you don't even need things like files and you know, these tool cutters. Just a simple knife, a bit of sandpaper would at least get you going on something like this. So it's probably worth starting with that, seeing if you like the techniques, if you like making your own bases, and then kind of advance to getting some more of the tools a little bit later on, if that's of interest to you. So I'm just going to move that out of the way. And then really the last thing is just anything you could pick up from around the house that might make some interesting shapes. So this is just a lid off a kind of a washing liquid bottle or a detergent bottle, and this is the top of a I think it's like a sunflower oil spray, but it's great for then creating circles, and I tend to like to add kind of circular parts to my bases. I just think it kind of adds to that kind of futuristic look. And it does push in really easy. So if I just take that base there, you can see you can kind of push that in, and then you can see it kind of transfers that shape quite easily. So it's quite a good idea just to kind of look out for some things that you can kind of stamp into the styrofoam with. And I've also got this tool here, which is actually it's kind of an etching tool, but you could use even just a kebab stick. So again, you don't have to kind of go out and buy anything expensive, just a kebab stick, again, for kind of picking out some of the fine details. As I was kind of cutting into this rock here, it's quite good to have something that you can kind of just pull out the little bits of styrofoam that you can't quite get to. So it's quite useful to have that. And of course, if you want to make any holes or details, again, it's quite a good idea to use a tool like that. So for these lines here, I would start with a tool like this to kind of make those lines, and then I can kind of go in there with a bit of sandpaper or a small file if I need to. So hopefully that's giving you some ideas of different tools that you might want to use to get you started. As I said, you don't need a lot to get going, and then you can buy more things and add more things as you go along. Again, feel free to like and subscribe, and if there's any thoughts you want to put into the comments or any further questions, then please feel free to do so, and I'll try and get back to you as soon as I can. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.